The bell above the door of Miller's grocery didn't ring. It groaned. It was a rusted, tired sound that matched the humidity clinging to the pavement of small-town Oak Haven, Georgia. Sarah stood at the register, her hand trembling as she slid a carton of eggs across the scanner. Beside her, 3-year-old Leo was humming a tuneless song, pulling at the hem of her frayed denim jacket. "That's $42.15, Sarah," the cashier said. Mrs. Gable had known Sarah since she was in pigtails, and her voice carried a heavy, unwanted pity. "Before we continue, if you are new to my channel, please click on the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to comment where you are listening from. Let's continue." Sarah felt the heat rise in her neck. She opened her wallet. It was a graveyard of old receipts and a single, crumpled $10 bill. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of change, mostly copper pennies and a few sticky nickels Leo had found in the couch cushions. I have to put some things back," Sarah whispered. Her eyes darted to the line forming behind her. She felt the burning gaze of the townspeople. She was the cautionary tale of Oak Haven, the girl who left for the city with big dreams and came back broke, fatherless child in tow, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on in a trailer that smelled like damp earth. She pushed the gallon of milk forward. "Keep that. Take back the cereal and the coffee." "Sarah, you need the milk for the boy," Mrs. Gable sighed. "I know," Sarah snapped, her voice cracking, "but I can't afford the bread and the milk. Take the bread back." Then, and the heavy thud of boots hit the linoleum. The air in the cramped aisle seemed to displace, replaced by the scent of gasoline, old leather, and peppermint. A shadow fell over Sarah, a massive, intimidating silhouette. Jax didn't look like he belonged in a grocery store. He looked like he belonged in a mugshot. His leather vest was cracked and faded, bearing the emblem of the iron remnant on the back, a skull entwined with heavy chains. His arms were road-mapped with tattoos, faded anchors, blurred script, and a jagged scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. His beard was a salt and pepper thicket, and his eyes were hidden behind dark aviators even indoors. The woman behind him in line, clutching her designer purse, audibly gasped and took a step back. The store went silent. In Oak Haven, men like Jax were trouble, and they were the ones you locked your doors for. Sarah froze, clutching Leo's hand. She expected a growl, an impatient comment about her wasting time. Instead, a gloved hand, black leather with the fingers cut out, reached over her shoulder. It didn't grab her. It dropped a crisp $50 bill onto the counter. "Keep the bread," Jax said. His voice was a low rumble like a bike idling at a stoplight. "Keep everything. Scan my stuff, too." Sarah turned, her eyes wide. I can't. Sir, please, I don't need charity." Jax didn't look at her. He looked at the shelf of cheap candy. "It ain't charity. It's an investment in the kid. He looks like he's growing, hard to grow on air and water." "I can pay you back," Sarah insisted, her pride warring with the desperate relief flooding her chest. "I work at the diner down the road." I don't want your money, ma'am," Jax said, finally tipping his glasses down. His eyes weren't cold. They were exhausted. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the bottom of too many bottles and the end of too many long roads. "Just get the boy home." Mrs. Gable scanned the rest of the items in a blur. Jax added a bouquet of wilting carnations from the bucket by the register and a large stuffed bear that sat on the top shelf. He handed the bear to Leo. "Thank you," Leo chirped, hugging the fuzzy brown head. Sarah followed the biker out into the blinding Georgia sun. His Harley Davidson sat idling at the curb, a beast of chrome and black paint. She watched him swing a leg over the seat, the leather creaking. "Why?" she called out over the roar of the engine. Jax settled his helmet on his head. He looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time. "Because someone once did it for my mother, and I never got to thank them. Consider the debt moved along." He kicked the bike into gear and vanished in a cloud of exhaust, leaving Sarah standing on the sidewalk with 3 bags of groceries and a heart that felt dangerously close to breaking. 3 weeks passed. The town of Oak Haven whispered, as it always did. They said the biker and the waif were a scandal in the making, but Sarah didn't care. That $50 had bought her enough time to pay the electric bill before the shutoff notice expired. She saw him again on a Tuesday. It was raining, one of those heavy gray downpours that turned the red clay of Georgia into a slick, treacherous mess. Sarah was walking home from the diner, her umbrella flipped inside out by the wind, Leo shivering under her coat. A low rumble cut through the sound of the rain. The black Harley slowed to a crawl beside them. Jax flipped up his visor. "Get in," he commanded, gesturing to the sidecar she hadn't noticed before, a rugged, custom-built attachment. "I'm soaked. I'll ruin the seat," Sarah protested. "It's leather and rain, sweetheart. It's seen worse. Get the kid out of the cold." That ride began a rhythm. Jax became a ghost that haunted the edges of her life, slowly moving toward the center. He would show up at the diner at 4 p.m., sit in the corner booth, and drink black coffee while Sarah finished her shift. He never asked for much, but he always left a $20 tip on a $4 bill. One evening, as he helped her haul a leaking bag of trash to the dumpster behind the diner, Sarah finally broke the silence. "You're not from here, Jax. Why stay in Oak Haven?" Jax leaned against the brick wall, lighting a cigarette. The cherry glowed in the twilight. "I'm waiting for something." "For what?" "For the courage to go where I'm actually supposed to be," he said cryptically. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "You're a good mom, Sarah. Most people would have quit, gone back to whatever bridge they burned. You're still standing." "I don't have a choice," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everyone has a choice. You chose to fight." Over the next few months, the scary biker became Jax. He fixed the leaking roof on Sarah's trailer. He taught Leo how to identify different types of engines by their sound. He sat on the porch with Sarah on humid nights, telling her stories of the road, of the vast deserts of Arizona and the cold, a sharp air of the Montana mountains. But he never spoke of his past. He never spoke of the iron remnant patch he had stopped wearing. And he never spoke of why he had a faded photograph of a young woman tucked into the mirror of his bike, a woman who looked hauntingly like Sarah. The friendship was a lifeline for Sarah, but for Jax, it was something else. It was penance. One night, while Leo slept inside, Jax sat on the porch steps, his head in his hands. "I had a daughter," he said, the words falling like stones into a well. "She'd be about your age. I walked out when she was 5. Thought the road was more important than the bedtime stories. By the time I turned around to go back, the road had taken her. An accident. She died never knowing I was coming home." Sarah sat beside him, laying a hand on his massive, scarred shoulder. "You're home now, Jax." "No," he whispered. "I'm just passing through. But I think I found why I stopped here." The peace didn't last. The past doesn't stay buried in a town like Oak Haven. And for a man like Jax, the past had wheels. The wind changed in late October. It brought the smell of wood smoke and the sound of more than one engine. Sarah was closing the diner when 3 bikes roared into the parking lot. These weren't like Jax's bike. These were loud, aggressive, and draped in the colors of a rival club Jax had mentioned only once, the Vipers. They walked in, smelling of stale beer and malice. The leader, a man with a barbed wire tattoo around his throat, looked at Sarah. "We're looking for a traitor. Goes by Jax. Heard he's been playing house with a local girl." "He's not here," Sarah said, and her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "He took something that didn't belong to him," the man sneered, leaning over the counter. "A debt from the old days. You tell him we're tired of waiting." When Jax found out, he didn't roar in anger. He went quiet. It was a silence more terrifying than any shout. He spent the night on Sarah's porch, a heavy iron wrench in his hand, watching the road. "You have to leave," Sarah pleaded. "They'll hurt you." "They'll hurt you to get to me," Jack said. "I won't let that happen, not again." The confrontation happened at the crossroads near the edge of town. Jax had told Sarah to stay inside, to lock the doors and not come out until the sun was up. But Sarah, fueled by a terrifying premonition, had followed him in her old beat-up sedan. She watched from the shadows of the trees as Jax stood alone against the three riders. The leader held a heavy chain. "Give us the cut, Jax, and the money you took from the vault," the leader hissed. "The money went to people who needed it," Jax said, his voice level. "It's gone. And the cut? I burned it the day I met Sarah." The fight was brutal. Jax was a powerhouse, but he was one man against three. Sarah watched in horror as they swarmed him. She didn't think. She just acted. She slammed her foot on the gas, her car screaming as it roared toward the group. The headlights blinded the attackers, scattering them. She braked hard, fishtailing into the dirt. "Jax, get in!" But Jax didn't move toward the car. He moved toward the leader, who had pulled a knife. In the chaos, a shot rang out, a sharp, metallic crack that echoed through the pines. The riders fled, the sound of their engines fading into the night like a dying heartbeat. Sarah ran to Jax. He was slumped against his Harley, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was clutching his side, his fingers stained dark. "Jax! Oh, God, Jax!" Sarah sobbed, ripping her shirt to stem the bleeding. "Hey, hey," Jax whispered, his voice weak. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. "Don't cry. The kid, is he okay?" "He's safe. He's at home. We have to get you to a hospital." "No time," Jax said. He fumbled with a key on a leather cord around his neck. He pulled it off and pressed it into Sarah's palm. "Small storage unit, Blue Ridge Road, number 42. Everything inside. It's for you and Leo. My bike, keep it for him. Tell him. I tell him he's got the heart of a lion." "Jax, please stay with me," Sarah screamed into the empty night. Jax smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile that erased the years of road grime and regret from his face. "I'm not leaving, Sarah. I'm just finally getting home." His eyes drifted shut as the first light of dawn began to bleed over the Georgia horizon, turning the chrome of his bike into a shimmering, heavenly gold. 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of a small, neat house on the outskirts of Oak Haven. It was paid for in full. In the driveway sat a beautifully restored Harley Davidson, waiting for a boy who was growing taller every day. In her hand, she held a photograph. It was the one from Jax's bike. On the back, in cramped, rough handwriting, it read, "To the daughter I lost and the one I found. Peace is a long road, but it always leads to family." Sarah looked up at the clear blue sky, the sound of a distant engine humming in the wind. She wasn't the cautionary tale anymore. She was a woman who knew that sometimes the most fearsome monsters are just angels who have been riding through hell for a little too long.